Hello, everybody. This is Chris Kelly, and I am doing the next podcast of everything education and learning. So today's guest is Jeremy Spiegel. Jeremy is most recently from Pearson. He worked at Pearson for several years and was the director of account services. And we're going to take on a interesting topic today, which is the topic of employee upskilling. We've all heard the numbers. The jobs that exist today in many cases are going to be obsolete 5 years from now. And there's a big need within corporations to upskill their employees because they don't have enough people that are fully trained to fill these jobs that they have. So this is a very important topic, and I hope you get a lot from this. Welcome, Jeremy, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for having me on what listening to you is an incredibly important and timely topic with everything going on and with the rapid progression of technologies. I mean, it should be at the top of everyone's mind.
So before we begin, can you walk me through, your background and, how you became passionate about employee upskilling?
Yeah, sure. So, I came at it a number of different ways. First was really, I think, throughout my career, I've been fortunate to been kind of thrust into roles and big responsibilities that kind of forced me to, in some cases, learn and upskill on the fly. But in doing so, every time I did it, I kind of realized that I really took it. It was something that I wanted to continue to do when whatever necessary training or whatever that I was doing was over. But when you're full-time working and you've got a job, getting that done beyond what the requirements are can obviously sometimes seem like a far-fetched dream, because who's got the time to do anything, let alone just take up some online learning while in one's spare time. But you raised such a good point in that as the years have progressed, as I've gone from an individual contributor to a first and second line manager, I've seen the prevalence of companies starting to offer their more robust online learning, which is great, but also seeing the rapid progression, and it's almost at the point where companies are being forced to react to the innovation that's happening because it's happening so quickly. And after being a director for several years, as you said, I was the director of account services at Pearson for 8 years. I was part of a standard reduction in force in March of 2024. And when that happens, one of the commitments I made to myself was, there's so much I don't know, and now I have no excuse not to take a go and learn at it. And so for the past truly, I'd say 9 or 10 months, I've been very passionate about getting everything I can know about those topics that I think are really going to define a lot of our sectors moving forward. AI, generative AI, big data. So those are kind of the areas that I've been doing, and I've been doing it very, very passionately, and just realizing, Chris, how much this kind of stuff is lacking in the general ethos of what companies are training their employees for.
No,
so you just continue to raise some great points about people need to be ready for it.
I don't want to say what year I graduated from college, but let's just say when I started in the publishing business, it was revolutionary to have a CD in the back of the book. It was, a really big thing. And you look at the technologies that we have today around artificial intelligence and gathering data around learner outcomes, and, all of these different tools that we have. It's just amazing, the change. Like the job that I have today, I couldn't imagine having back when I was in college, in the 90s. It was just totally beyond comprehension, hence the reason we never got trained on those skills.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, and you mentioned that CD. The first, when I was a mid-20s bullish program manager, I released one of those first CDs. And you're right, back in the mid 2000s, that was a real big deal.
So, as a person who was
Yep.
a manager, you hit upon a topic because right now you have lots of time to do this training because you're looking for your next opportunity. Why is it so
Correct.
difficult for employees to get this training when they're on the job? I get it, when you don't have a job, you have a lot more time to do this, but like, what are the obstacles that you see within organizations that prevent this really important training from taking place?
Well, it's a couple of things. One, it's any corporate company could develop a robust online learning platform and ecosystem if they truly are committed to it. You look at Salesforce, you look at IBM, you look at so many of these companies that have developed their own. So to some degree, they are probably more equipped to handle that to handle what will be coming on. But what most companies that aren't the big FANGs or the Salesforces of the world will find is that their their own maturity in incorporating these new technologies like generative AI, I find many of them are still trying to wrap their hands and heads around it and figure out how they're even going to incorporate it into their business. And they haven't even thought about the fact that, okay, we're going to put it into our business, but then we actually need to train our people on how to do it. I just feel like many of them aren't there yet. And that lack of speed could be harmful to some companies. I mean, it all depends on how quickly this comes and how much our landscape changes, and who
No,
knows
I
how quickly
mean,
that will happen.
as someone who has been, in the education technology space, you see some companies that are really pushing the envelope when it comes to these new tools, but there's also a lot of companies that, I don't want to call them laggards because that's, I think, too harsh a term, but they're much more to us, slow to adopt these technologies. I mean, the same could be said going back 20 years ago when we went from print to digital. It took a long time for educational publishers to make that transition and to see the benefit from doing it. But eventually that transition was made, I think in part because customers were demanding it.
Yeah, it's interesting how you make that point, because that is why the publishers finally kind of had to make that digital transformation. But now you start thinking about the next leap to kind of what they're calling the fifth industrial revolution with AI and whatnot. Education, or as you and I come to know with higher education, they seem to not be embracing that kind of tech. I think things like fully online learning, using AI and incorporating AI scares a lot of them.
Yep.
And as you've worked in higher ed as long as both of us have, we know that when they're slow to adopt, they are slow to adopt. And so I think this time around, it's all the ed tech companies now trying to usher their customers in whatever part of the higher ed ecosystem on the campus that they work with, but they're probably trying to usher them along, because if there's ever a place that's got outdated infrastructures and really needs to be figuring out how to kind of be more cost effective, it's higher ed
No, I mean,
institutions.
especially when, I mean, as you know, higher ed and K-12 for that matter are really behind the
Oh
times,
yeah.
when it comes to technology. If you compare it to other industries, like fintech or pharma or life sciences, they're much more
Yep.
ahead of the curve, when it comes to technologies. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that, because I think the first foremost, it really has to deliver learning outcomes at the end of the day. And I think that's something that, that has to be seen in this entire process. But if you look back, to your time when you were a manager, how would you
Mm-hmm.
have given time for your employees to get this upskilling? Because the big challenge that I see in a lot of companies is even though they know they need to be doing these things to retain their employees and to be able to move forward as a business, that the training just doesn't happen for a variety of different reasons. So looking at what you've done most recently and looking at your time being a manager, what would you recommend to these companies?
Yeah, and that's a great and loaded question, and your comments kind of helping me answer it. So, as you said, for a variety of reasons, I don't think we implemented as much of robust learning and development as we absolutely should have. One primary reason was that we started it from the ground up. So I think just having a smooth cadence of operations and ways of working and all of that was kind of focal to the L&D. I mean, what candidly happened from a leadership, a lot of learning came experiential, both for me as a manager and director, but also for our employees. They got, I mean, I will say there were a couple instances, but they weren't consistent, but there were a couple instances throughout my tenure where we actually got the opportunity to upskill on newer technologies incorporated with AI and stuff. That was kind of one of the perks of being in the division that we were. And kind of about a year before I had left, we had just acquired Credly, which they are very well known. So as soon as we acquired them, every quarterly town hall, someone would ask, when can we get access to this? Because I think with having such a robust system like that, so many employees now, and I think especially when you're at those large FTSE 100s or Fortune 500s, you got a lot of motivated employees who are like, if you give us the resources, we will also do it. And that was one thing that myself and my director colleagues tried to do. In the beginning, we tried to create some homegrown learning and development, which I always encourage of any managers and directors. The problem is when it's these new technologies, you kind of need to be as upskilled if you're going to be training other people on it too. So for something like that, where it's more about sourcing it, that was a lot of what we were trying to do and figure out, and that's what I see now is that there are a lot of smaller companies that offer kind of those partnerships with corporations to either adopt these curriculums for AI, for data management, that either are already pre-curated, or a lot of these corporations, you could grow your own if you have the money and whatever to do that. So I think there's an ecosystem that is developing out there now that I certainly did not have as a manager even 5-6 years ago. But what I will say is someone at the company, and maybe it's always the learning and someone at the company has to be fully invested in owning that aspect of it, whether it's just kind of a learning academy or something like that. Because as you said in the beginning of the conversation, and it's such a good point, it's such a key for retention. You want to keep your employees, you develop them, and you train them so there are so many advantages to it. We can continue to keep talking about all that. It's just, now it comes to what is going to drive these companies and what is going to be that proverbial kick in the pants that they need to do it.
Well, there's two things that I think are really interesting. One is, the employee retention piece. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, like the skills that I learned when I was in college many, many moons ago are obsolete today. So like I had to learn these skills on my own. And, as a person, I've always been big on trying to keep my skills up to date and, all of those different things. But I think the other big thing is, a lot of these companies are now finding jobs that are just going unfilled, whether it be an AI engineer, whether it be a data person, whatever the job might be, they're just not going filled. The challenge that I've seen in the learning development space, and I've mentioned this in other podcasts that I've done, is that a lot of companies really struggle seeing the return on investment when it comes to corporate learning. They see the benefit of it, but in terms of improving employee retention, in terms of getting additional customers, in terms of improving product development, it's a really difficult thing to show for a lot of these organizations, the ability to see, you know, the impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think in that you make such excellent point there. In many ways, learning and development, it's just another it's another P&L that's got to be owned, that's got to be spoken for, and that's got to have metrics to show its efficacy. Um, and I think that paradigm is really a shit. I mean, really with any part of the organization, but learning and development really, many of the people, at least in my experience, who were in that, former educators themselves or people just very passionate about learning, it's a different job now. And I noticed as I was leaving Pearson, there was kind of that changing of the guard, because what learning and development requires now is not just someone who is passionate and understands how to upskill someone in 2025, but also how to cultivate that assurance, as you mentioned, that its return on investment is aligning with key business objectives. And that's the big part that I think organizations will need to really consider and think about before they take any kind of investment, whether it's money or time. You got to, if you're a leader of the company, you got to figure out what metrics am I going to use to say, okay, we're targeting, once we implement this for 12 months, 10% retention increase. I'm just pulling percentages out of my what. You got to be able to have something. I don't blame companies for wanting that. However, I think there's been so many advancements with data and how things can be not just quantified, but qualified with qualitative metrics. And I think leadership needs to be more open to embracing the full idea of big data, which isn't just like, okay, you had $1 million over last year, which is really what a lot of them only care about often now. And so I think it can be done, but you have to have a commitment from leadership and whoever's running the show that we're going to get together and figure out how we're going to make sure that this is an investment, because the other thing to do is the downside. If you don't do it, I mean, there's a significant cost there, right?
Exactly. So a thing that I'm curious about, so you decide, if I understand correctly, you decided to take this on your own during the period of unemployment that you've had at this point. Is that correct?
It is. It's something I've been wanting to do. I mean, since kind of the whole, I will admit publicly that initially when the whole GPT thing kind of blew up in late 2022, I was a skeptic, just partially because I like to see how the dust settles, but also because I'm a Gen Xer. I'm skeptical of everything. So it kind of comes with my territory. But I think the longer it went on, it's just kind of like, no, this is happening. And once I knew I was going to have some time on my hands, I knew there was an opportunity to kind of jumpstart, my own upskilling. Because for whatever my next path forward would be, most likely these technologies are going to be more incorporated into it. So it could only serve myself best to be as prepared as I possibly could. What I wasn't prepared for in a positive way was it really became habitual and in a positive sense too. Something now I do now, 30 minutes minimum every day. Usually it ends up being, a little over an hour. And I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying listening. It's fascinating stuff. I haven't gotten to some of the nitty gritty data science stuff that I plan on taking, but on the whole, it's just, there's so much good material out there. There's free stuff. There's robust, comprehensive platforms like Coursera, which is what I'm going through, or Udemy, or DataCamp. So many, and that is something that I think what resonates with me with this whole technology revolution, which I believe is different from others, is how accessible it is this time around for everyone. There's been such a commitment to make things open source, which I love. And so really anyone who has the passion and time to want to learn, you can do it. And not just by taking the courses, you can go and on Hugging Face and build yourself a portfolio and get that kind of experience, which is great, because otherwise you are relying on the job experiential education, which, as we said before, is probably the best kind, but very few companies are having those kinds of experiences where they are incorporating the latest and greatest technologies. So if you're not experiencing it, you got to be learning it
So
some way.
for your next employee, you're going to be bringing skills that they may not have. And, this is going to make you a more valued employee at this organization because you're able to provide them insights into things like data science or artificial intelligence that are going to be critical to growing their business in the next 3 to 5 years, as these technologies become more prevalent in organizations.
Absolutely, yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. And right now, it's kind of get a job that I can enjoy. Whether it's if I could predict myself a few years down the road, that area of data science and AI at the leadership level kind of fascinates me, because as the other side of all of this with the advancement and going on is the safeguards and ethical kind of concerns that are absolutely genuine ethical concerns. And, that is still kind of in its infancy in so many places. And so I'm trying to upskill myself in that area, whereas, I could step into kind of a first or second line leadership role with data scientists. And I think that's an area that I think is going to really be defining the future in so many ways with their models and whatnot. So it's kind of a personal passion for mine, but I also I want to be, I am a very ethically driven person, personally and professionally. And so to kind of be at an area where you can kind of offer your thought leadership or opinions on, these safeguards is such a fascinating concept for me too.
So I'm curious, what areas have you upskilled in, and how did you make the decision to upskill in these particular areas?
So to answer the second question first, it's been such a huge problem. It's an embarrassment of riches, just because if you're one of those people who enjoys learning, and wish I could go talk to my 18-year-old self who didn't enjoy it as much, but now there's just so much I want to. So I've really had to be selective. So the platform I'm taking, I've taken some leadership specializations that focus in generative AI and whatnot. I am finishing up, and I should finish within the next day or so, a Microsoft Business Analyst certification. When I'm done with that, I am going right into IBM's data science certification. That will take probably 3-4 months, because that goes into SQL, which I know just a little bit about, and then Python.
Yep.
So there'll be some coding courses that I'll be probably tearing my continuously graying hair out of. But I'm excited because it's that challenge, and that's the other piece of it is, if I can challenge myself, I want to be able to do that as well. So it's keeping me focused, staying on these tracks. And after that, we'll see what happens. But what's nice about a lot of these platforms is they extend beyond just the technologies. They also offer things like in leadership, digital strategy. And a lot of them are either offered by the big companies or through, I'm taking a quick little thing in prompt engineering from a professor at Vanderbilt University. Just a quick, so it's also in conjunction with universities and stuff that are getting involved with this, or the IBMs and Microsofts and Googles of the world too, who are curating the courses. So it's cool to be able to learn from those companies or those academics who are kind of at the forefront of it as well.
I've been following Intuit, and Intuit, has gone really big into AI.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that they do with, Intuit Live is that they have, seasonal tax employees that come onto their platform to help people do their taxes. And they developed a whole academy around people getting the skill sets that they needed to know in order to be a seasonal tax employee at Intuit. So if you look at these companies right now, do you think, or do you know if they're using this training as a way to build a funnel for future employees?
I mean, I would think any company large enough to have what you call, quote unquote, that kind of academy with either part-time or university internships. I couldn't imagine
Yep.
them not having something like that and not considering it. I think because of what that then naturally does is creates, as you said, that funnel of people who are kind of already acclimated. So it naturally then begets a quicker onboarding, supposedly, with people who are familiar. So there's a natural, organic kind of logic, I think, that would go to it as well. With everything going on, it's just one more element of at what point are you as a company starting to think about your
Yep.
upskilling for that next generation? And it's all about kind of where are you focusing on your current employees? Are you more focusing on the university graduates and the MBAs? I mean, there are, and I think that's the other reason and why I've been digging into this is because with, as you said at the beginning of the podcast, jobs that are there today are going to
Yep.
be obsolete in 5 years, but there's going to be other ones. And the people who recognize that and I think are ready for them in the next few years will have the most opportunities. And that's what I'm excited about. Can't say I know what they're all going to be, but anyone who, whether it's a company or employees or single person, if you're upskilling on these things, it's going to be beneficial to you wherever you're going in the next few years. And you may be like those COVID employees in 2020 and 2021 who are, getting double asking because employers were fighting for them. They say there's such a talent shortage now, so let's see what happens.
No, very interesting. So some of the questions I have. So with these upskillings that you're doing right now at this point, walk me through if there's any certifications or anything like that are part of this process.
Yeah, so so I've done Data Camp before and I've done Coursera before. They're very different in execution and presentation. I will say the way they've presented and the way I think a lot of these platforms present their learning is, there's content either that you read or you watch a video, right? And and then the second part is that experiential learning. If you're in like a coding course, that's very easy to do. Now, some of the courses the AI courses I've been taking, that's been very easy to work with like model GPT prompts and have fun with that. Some of the data stuff, it's been a little more challenging to then introduce, especially if you're doing business analysis or something. It's pretty much, you try to do hands-on exercises. You take a spreadsheet, analyze it, but it can't. It's harder to assess those things unless your platform is sophisticated enough to understand like an essay response and evaluate that. Versus if your platform is really just an quantitative one that adds up points, and then which some of them are, and that's fine. Because I think for me, as long as I'm getting the content knowledge, there are so many places with this technology now to apply it later, for free somewhere. As long as I'm kind of getting the concepts and getting the ideas down first, I'm a satisfied
Very
customer.
interesting. So if you were, if you were back to your, 22-year-old self and, was in college, what would you recommend to yourself in terms of continuing education and building off of, what you had just learned in college?
I don't know if I was in college it was published yet, but I would tell him as soon as it publishes to read The Personal MBA by Josh Kaufman. I don't know if you've read that. It is a phenomenal book that, and this is not to discredit higher ed institutions or programs, but really goes into how with the right tools and framework and, listing of you can get that same knowledge at an MBA that you would get in an MBA for far, 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 far less money. And so it was more so taking a look at the frameworks and things that were evaluated there. So I tell them to do that. But otherwise, and it sounds as cliche as it's going to sound, but I would tell him, look, just because you're getting out of this brick and mortar college, the learning doesn't stop. I would tell him to read as much as he can. The more the better. I think especially in the past 20 years, those who are knowledgeable and educated, is incredibly important. And I think it's always incredibly important to just make sure you're educated and researched on, what are truth and what are facts. I think, we never knew 20 years ago how increasingly important those would be today, but it is, and it's going to continue to be. And yeah, I would just tell him to always be looking for opportunities to learn new things,
Yeah,
because
and I
when
would
you
even
do
go
that
one
is
step
never a bad
further
thing.
in terms of
And
like myself. So, my father worked at General Electric, and he eventually got laid off and then moved
yep,
into other positions, but he had 3 jobs in his career. And, like General Electric, really took care of him in terms of, his work and training, all of that. And you look at,
yeah,
where we are today in 2025. I mean, most people are probably going to work for 3 companies in 10 years, especially if you're in that 20 to 40 range. So I think it's really
right.
important for not a lot of companies, but individuals to really take this task on themselves, to continue to upskill and to continue to get that new training that's going to make them, very valuable to an employee, because if you don't, you're going to be left behind. There are just so many jobs that are out there right now that are evolving over time, and you're just going to be left behind if you don't keep up with the latest trends and the latest learning of what's going on.
You couldn't be more right. I mean, and as we said, hopefully the larger companies are recognizing this and starting to incorporate it more, because as an aside, a positive one, it's a great funnel for employee retention if you do it right. And I think so many of these smaller companies and mid-sized companies who may just be so focused on keeping the lights on or in getting growth, that L&D, unfortunately, is the last thing on their minds, even though it may actually help them hit their marks better, but that's neither here nor there. Sometimes when you are constantly in urgent mode, you can't see the forest for the trees, but you got to assume, unless you're working at those companies and fortunate enough to have their own robust curriculum, you got to kind of have that personal motivation. And I will say initially it took me a little bit, but then once, I made it kind of a habit. Now it's kind of something I enjoy doing, get into a nice mind frame. And, anyone who can spare 30 minutes a day, I would really encourage them to do so, because the payoffs are just going to be incremental.
But in closing, so you've mentioned that, Coursera was a good place to go. You said data, and I'm blanking on the name right now.
Data camp.
Okay.
Data camp.
And are there other
Yep.
places that you would recommend to get upskilling?
Yeah, I mean, look, all the big guy. If you want to be cloud specific, or to you want a specialty, Google, Amazon, Salesforce, any of them, those big ones have their own training platforms, especially to train about their ecosystem. Certainly, if you want to specialize your career that way, you can do that. But otherwise, any of the like Udemy is another one, Udemy. That's a general platform. Udacity is another one, Udacity. What's the other one? Big one. Skillsoft is another one. There is so many out there. It's almost like there's no excuse, and pretty much for if you are if you are specialized in some kind of specific career and you're looking to upskill, but I mean, I think now there's if you can search hard enough, I think you can absolutely find it.
Great. Well, Jeremy, thank you very much for being on the call today. I appreciate all the insights that you have provided. Again, I think this is not only a critical topic for companies, but it's a critical topic for individuals. I mean, the companies, they need to be doing this if they're going to stay, vibrant as a company, but the individuals themselves need to be doing this training to stay up to speed, because where we are, today in 2025 is very different from where we were in 2005 and very different from where we're going to be in 2045. So, and it's even shorter periods of time than that. I mean, we've seen so much change. I mean, the amount of change that we've seen in our careers is just at a breathtaking pace compared to our parents and grandparents.
It's so true. And I think that breakneck pace is continuing. And I think, we may look back in 1 to 2 years and remember having you saying that and think how much has changed since then. I mean, I think we're going to, and that's why all the much more important is get on the train of learning, because it's
some
leaving.
People in this post that I think would be interested in connecting with Jeremy based on his skills. And, again, thank you very much.
Great.
And I enjoyed our conversation today.
Myself as
Thank
well,
you.
Chris. The honor is mine. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Have a good one.